What is going on, investors? Back again, another weekly analysis of the FAANG stock: Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, and we throw in Microsoft and Tesla in there as well. Talk a little bit about some of the broader news. We'll jump into a little bit of the rumors and stuff that's been going on with all these companies. Then finally, we'll jump over to the charts and take a look at what we see here. A lot of interesting stuff going on. So this week, the markets kind of melted up. We had a lot of positive news, or at least a lot of news on the stimulus. Seems like that's progressing. I'm not exactly sure if that's going to happen or not, but all the talks seem to be good for the markets, at least in the shorter term. Now, if you're here loving our videos, hit that subscribe button. I've got a ton of videos coming over the next month for you. We've got Delta Airlines earnings coming. We got JP Morgan. We got Johnson & Johnson. We've got Wells Fargo, Citigroup, BlackRock. All the big banks report earnings next week. I will be bringing these all to you over the next few days to weeks to come. Obviously, then we'll jump into all the tech companies and all the stuff that we normally do here on the channel. So Trump says he wants more stimulus. He was on a radio show today saying he wants this big stimulus bill. I don't know. Trump says a lot of things. I would, for any politician, this is for President Trump, this is for Vice President Biden, if he happens to become president, I would pay little attention to what any of these people say. It's more what actually happens in reality. Now, if you want to trade off this information, sure, there's probably some opportunities there, but I would wait until we get some concrete information before I really decide one way or another based on what these people are saying, either on a radio station or on Twitter or anywhere else. Just in general, for any politician on either side, just wait until to see what they do. It's less important what they say, and it's much, much more important to what they do. Ignore a lot of the noise. That's what I would recommend. Facebook ended the week down 1%, pretty flat. We're in this sideways range like we predicted maybe a few weeks ago here on these weekly videos. Now, we did have a nice little dip here in Facebook. You could have probably traded it a little bit, swing traded it, maybe day traded it if you wanted to, but Facebook, not a lot of news for the week. Apple down 1.56%. This is a stock I was in and out of this week. Got it, not always at the best price, but it kind of bounced around. It chopped around a little bit. Not a lot of news, except, see, this is exciting news, especially if you're like me, you got an older iPhone. We've got a launch next week. This will be an interesting event here, October 13th. So that's obviously early next week. They're likely to release the new set of iPhones with 5G and probably some other things, maybe some new AirPods, maybe some other products. We'll see what happens here, but it appears that most of these products will only be available the next month. So not necessarily right away, but that will impact Apple's next quarter. And so we likely anticipate a very good demand for these phones, myself included. Amazon really melted up towards the end of the week. Now, it ended up flat, basically down 0.95% for the week, but had a night. You see here, the last couple days, Amazon's been on a nice run. Why is that? I think it's stimulus. Any kind of direct checks to investors or really employees or anything is going to benefit Amazon. A lot of that money is going to flow into Amazon's coffers. Now, Netflix had a nice week, up 0.81%. When we jump over the chart, we'll see this stock has broken up into an upper channel. That's interesting. Now, they had some negative news here. They were indicted by a grand jury based on some material on a movie that appeared on the site. And so I don't know, I'm not a lawyer. I don't know the legal aspects of these things, but it's interesting that a platform like Netflix can put up a film and could potentially be indicted because of it. So I don't know if there's First Amendment protections for this or not. I honestly don't know. I just think this is interesting, and this has not necessarily implications for Netflix necessarily. We see the stock didn't really react too much this week to this, but it is something that you want to keep in mind, that if precedent is set that Netflix can face damages based on the content on its platform, that might open the door up for other potential lawsuits down the road. Google perfectly flat for the week, down 0.28%, but, melted up a little bit towards the end of the week. Since you're on YouTube, probably watching this right now, Google's YouTube is going to test out product tagging. So if you're already not a fan of the ads and a lot of the e-commerce stuff, a lot of the money-making ways of YouTube, guess what? There's going to be more of those in the future. Looks like they're going to be partnering with Shopify to maybe sell directly through the YouTube platform. Interesting. If you're a creator or a video maker here on YouTube, might be kind of nice, maybe an extra way to make money. Whether or not this catches on, we'll see. Microsoft down 0.88% this week, but again, melted up towards the end of the week. I think as you get into stimulus talks and things like that, definitely going to benefit a company like Microsoft. Interesting thing from Microsoft, I think this is going to be a trend, obviously, with everybody. They're going to make work from home a permanent option for a lot of their employees. I think what Microsoft and all these companies are finding are people are as or more productive at home than they were in the office. It's going to cost Microsoft less. They might have to pay these employees less money, have less office space, have less cleaning staff and furniture and all that other stuff. This is a great option, especially if you don't want to live where these companies have office buildings. Now you might be able to work at Microsoft and not have to live in Seattle or San Francisco or wherever they have offices. GameStop strikes a deal with Microsoft. Microsoft's real, obviously with the Xbox, they're big into this gaming. And I think that 2021, I think is just going to be a big year for Microsoft on the gaming side in terms of press releases and advancement. They've got this cloud access that they're going to have with Xbox, and they're going to bring it to iOS. They're partnering here with GameStop. I think this is going to be a big year for Microsoft in terms of gaming. Finally, Tesla had a nice week. Down 5%, but bounced around, was down a little bit lower. You see down here at the low 400s, 410, and the end of the week at 430. Had a nice day today. Received a new street high price target. Now, I think there's people that are estimating a higher price target than this, but this is probably the major kind of Wall Street, quote unquote, Wall Street analyst research firms here. He was at 400 previously. Now he's up at 578. And one of his justification is Amazon is traded in the 50 to 100x earnings range for over a decade, and they think Tesla will follow suit. And that's something I talked about on the Trader Merlin show is, there's always this talk about these companies like, they're high, the PE ratio's high, the price to sales is high, they don't make any money or whatever. Look at this chart of Amazon. Does it look anywhere along this chart that anybody gives a darn about the PE ratio here at 100? This is actually way lower than when I started buying Amazon. So they've definitely grown into that. And that's the key with these price to earnings ratio. In a vacuum, they don't make a big deal, but I think over the long term, they probably do matter. But if the company like Amazon and potentially like Tesla can grow into that, it's certainly something that they can potentially do. I saw 500,000 maybe deliveries here for Tesla this year. That's a lot of cars. They're going to have to build a lot more of them here in the future. We'll see if they're able to do that. Jumping over the charts, again, we predicted on this downswing that I believe stocks were going to start waving out, start trading in a sideways range. We pulled back, I thought, to a level where investors were comfortable with, and we're going to trade sideways. We're actually right here. This light blue line here is 50-day moving average. We're hugging it pretty tightly over the last few days here with Facebook, and I believe that to be the case, at least in the near future here with all these stocks. We're in a range here up to call 270. It's probably a little lower with Facebook. We're probably up in we're close to the upper end of a range at about 267 to 270, call it, and the bottom end of the range between 247 and 255. So somewhere in this range with Facebook. Not necessarily a compelling position to go long, not necessarily a great spot to go short. If you want to play inside these ranges, certainly something you can do. Now, moving on to Apple. Apple's hugging this green line that I have right here. This is the 50-day moving average, and we are hugging it. I mean, we are hugging it like a 16-year-old boy is hugging his new girlfriend. They are making out on the playground here. Take a look. We are just right on top of this line, especially the last few days here with Apple. Now, What's going to happen with Apple? I think we have this long-term trend line here, this red line here. I can extend it maybe a little bit up here. I think it's potentially we could come back up into there. We're going to have to break this upper end of support at about 120 with Apple. We're at 117 now. It's had trouble. Apple has peeked its head up into the 117 where it's closed today, and it's got rejected every time. You see, actually, I have a sell order here. I've been buying Apple. It dips below this 50-day moving average. I've been buying it. It dips. It comes up above the 50-day moving average. I've been setting a stop loss and I've been getting closed out of it. So I made a couple bucks on Apple this week. I think you could continue to do that. I think we're going to be in a tight range with Apple between 110 and 120. If it breaks this I would say between 117 and 120, if you get a strong close above that with Apple, it could be retesting this upper trend line up here, which could be, if it happens next week or in the near future, at the 125, 127, 130 range. To get it all the way up to the all-time highs of 137, I think it's going to be a little difficult, at least in the near term. Amazon, again, also trading in a sideways range. So we came up here, bottomed out here, and now we're kind of waving up. But now we've actually got a nice little short-term uptrend with Amazon. So you've got this kind of like shorter-term trend here, and if Amazon is going to keep riding this wave up, that's possible. I think any type of stimulus news, anything like that, would definitely be a positive for Amazon. But we actually broke above. I had an upper trend line here at about 32.65-ish, and we actually closed pretty solid above it at 32.88. So that is a very bullish sign, I think, with Amazon. This looks like a really nice setup here to me. We're in a short-term uptrend. We're above this 50-day moving average. The MACD's turning positive. RSI's trending positive. Everything's looking pretty good if you're in Amazon right now. Netflix has been a much wider range. So I have these lower end range. This is where I'd want to buy the stock, but obviously if you're long the stock already, you like when it breaks out. Now, Netflix is popping out above kind of this lower end range a little more. And that's kind of what we talked about, I think, on the last week's video, that, you know, Netflix wants to like shoot up above. I don't think I'd be really super excited to go long here. I'd wait for at least a pullback down into the 515 range. That would be an interesting spot because you could see some support here, although we have these big candles kind of slicing through that range. Might not be the best range. You might want to pull it down a little bit, maybe into that 510 range. Any pullback into this lower end range, especially down in the 470 range, people say, hey, that's crazy. That's $70 off today's price. Look, there's a lot of macro stuff happening in the environment right now that we're in. It's certainly possible with Netflix, but we've kind of popped up above the range with Netflix, and we've seen we did it here, and it failed both times pretty rapidly. And so I would actually probably assume the same thing with Netflix until it's proven otherwise. If it happens to continue its upward trend, it'll see some resistance up here in this range, up in the 555 range. If it happens to break up above that, you're probably retesting these highs up here and retesting this upper trend line. Moving on to Google. So Google bottomed out. Didn't look like it was doing a whole lot. Came back up here to like this intermediate trend line that we created here, and it kind of broke up above it. This actually is looking a little bit more like Amazon too. We're kind of now in a shorter term uptrend here with Google. So I kind of like what I'm seeing here with Google. Kind of broke above here, kind of a resistance point, and then kind of gapped and closed up pretty high up above that. So we're kind of in the middle of this gap here. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Google in the coming weeks, but this looks pretty nice to me, at least in the shorter term with Google. Again, they have the holiday season coming up. They've got it may be a little bit more positive catalyst than some of these other stocks coming up, with airlines and stimulus kind of coming back, travel coming back, things getting a little bit back more to normal. I think Google is an interesting play. I think in the shorter term, we can easily get back up in here to the 1550. A little bit longer term, you're probably looking at 1580s range and eventually probably pushing up into the all-time highs. I don't know when that will be. It'll probably be a little while, but an interesting play here with Google. We're definitely looking strong here in the short to intermediate term. taking a look at Microsoft doing just this beautiful, just, kind of wave formation. We've kind of waved. We had kind of the blowout here, maybe the euphoria blowout, and then we've come back here and we're in this range. Now we're at a really, really interesting spot here with Microsoft. If it breaks above this, really where it's at right now, right at 215, 216, call it. If it breaks above that, let's say on Monday or Tuesday next week, we get into this 217 to 18 range. That is extraordinarily bullish, I think, for this stock, to at least in the short term. I'm not talking necessarily longer term, although I'm bullish pretty much all these stocks in the longer term. In the shorter term, yeah, this stock is on a nice run. We see here we've created a nice little uptrend here. I think if we close above this is going to be a tough area, I think, because you see here the stock pivoted here and went down, and then it got rejected here, kind of hesitated here for just a second, and then gapped up, and then came back here, stopped. But then once it broke this right where we're at, like 217 to right where this stock is, right at 216, we'll call it, it created some overhead resistance here. It probably created a little bit of resistance here. We'll see. I mean, Microsoft's right at a tipping point. If it gets rejected here and you want to go long Microsoft, it's a stock I like, or you kind of want to string trade this, I would look for a pullback to this trend line. I mean, this trend line's not exact. I just threw this in here right now, but any pullback into the 213, 212, call it even maybe closer to 214 range, really, a dollar or two off where we're at, I think the stock will see some support back onto this trend line and then maybe bounce back up. So Microsoft looking really strong to me as well, at least in the short term. Finally, moving on to Tesla. Tesla's in this also creating kind of this beautiful wave. The candles are a little shorter here, not quite as bullish as, say, like an Amazon or a Microsoft or even Netflix as well. But we are in kind of a shorter term uptrend with this stock as well. It will see some resistance here. We're kind of coiling here right at a spot here, right at that call it 450. It's a little ways away, although this stock's a little bit more expensive from a dollar perspective. So $17 is not too far away from where this stock trades. So as this stock gets up into the 450 range, that's a critical level, because you see here 450 was support here, was some support here, broke it, was resistance here, resistance here, resistance here, resistance here. If Tesla can break up above 450, I think we're finally coming back up, potentially up into the new highs. I think it could make a stop here at the 475, 480 range and see what happens there. Maybe we're at a new kind of upper channel. If it's rejected here at 450, we're in a tight range here. So I would actually expect at some point Tesla to have a little bit wider candles. You see, we had longer candles here. When Tesla kind of gets these shorter candles, it tends to want to break up or break down at some point. And I could see that. If it breaks down, I could see this moving average here providing some support. That's at 390 right now. That would be an interesting spot, I think, to acquire Tesla. This short-term uptrend could provide some level of support, although again, it's really close. We're coiling right up against, we've got some shorter term uptrends like support, but then we've got overhead resistance, and we're literally within call it $20. It's like 1 or 2% each way here with Tesla. And so this stock could go either way. It's not a stock I would really be excited about jumping into unless you have some trade setup that you like here. I would wait and see what's going to happen with Tesla. If it breaks up above the 450, I think you could have a nice little run, maybe a $20 run up a little bit higher, and then see what happens with the stock. If it breaks down, I think you could have easily a $20 move, maybe even a $30, maybe even a $40 move down to the downside. That would create some buying opportunities there. So there you go, guys. That was the FAANG stocks plus Microsoft and Tesla. Again, next week, got tons of earnings for you guys. Got Delta Airlines. That'll probably be tomorrow. We've got all the major banks next week: Citigroup, BlackRock, JP Morgan, Johnson & Johnson. We'll throw in healthcare. We've got Bank of America, Wells Fargo. Just lots and lots of earnings. If you love finance videos, I'm going to be bringing a ton of them to you over the next, call it 3 to 4 weeks. Really excited about it. This is what I get super excited about it, and I'm excited to share it with you here on the channel. Hopefully you guys are doing well out there. We'll be back again soon. Good luck with your investments.